All right. Well, officially welcome to our second webinar between Coalition Technologies and Rankscale AI. We are going to continue to evaluate in this webinar and also in our follow-up next week different mythologies or rumors or legends that have started to form around GEO. This idea that you can improve your ranking inside of an LLM and the different tactics that people have been promoting as part of that effort. So we have a bit of a unique perspective simply because Rankscale has this amazing tracking tool that helps brands understand where and why they rank and what exactly LMs are speaking about their brand in their prompt responses. And so that gives us a data layer, and then a Coalition, we are able to bring our execution layer since we're working with several hundred active clients on SEO and AI SEO, and also monitoring and managing data for a large number of others. I think our powers combined, we get to do something pretty special in these conversations. So, Patrick, maybe you could quickly introduce yourself and your role at Rankscale and what Rankscale does for anybody who maybe isn't in the know.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. My name is Patrick. I'm the co-founder of Rankscale, also responsible for marketing department of Rankscale. I joined the company last year, we founded the company last year after I found Matthias, because I had the need with my SEO agency to have such a tool to actually track prompt responses. And there was no such tool available in Europe, at least. And therefore, we came together, talked about it, and I actually joined the company pretty fast. And since then, we are constantly building the software with user feedback. And yeah, happy to be here and walk through on-page SEO or geo myths.
Awesome. And just on behalf of Coalition, we are a 16-year-old full-service digital agency, but best known for our work in SEO and in paid search. We do quite a bit of work in the e-commerce space, but that's not exclusively where we put our emphasis. Probably about half of our work is on lead generation or reputation type campaigns. And so, again, got a couple hundred clients today that depend on us for that activity. And obviously, AI SEO or GEO is a big part of that. So, I'm glad to actually dive into the data. There were some things that Patrick, you guys found that we didn't necessarily agree with it in full, or we had maybe some little caveats we were going to add. So today we are going to break this webinar out into two parts. We'll have content myths first, and then we'll get into code and technical myths second. We've got a good deal of findings to touch on, and Patrick and I will just be running through and talking through some of these outcomes of some analysis and some reporting. And again, if you have questions, drop them into the Q&A at the bottom there. So, Patrick, I think our first myth that we had was that GEO is purely a third-party discipline, meaning you really are only focused on publishing content off-page or away from your own website, and you're primarily focused on almost like a digital PR campaign. And your website is just not important to these big AIs. And we want to be able to, I don't even have slides open. I apologize there. Thank you for that, Patrick. There we go. So GEO is purely third-party discipline. Your own content, your own website is really irrelevant just because it doesn't have the authority or maybe meat to it that a big press publication is. You want to run us through some of these the tests that we ran, and then also how this turned up in terms of what we actually saw with results.
Yes, of course. So as we already saw with Jules, another colleague from Rankscale last week in the webinar, we ran an experiment on plus-size wedding dresses. And yeah, we analyzed essentially what gets pulled into the answer. And we see, so the myth is that it's purely a third-party discipline, and that myth is busted because, yeah, Geo is third-party technical SEO and content all together. The thing is, earlier it worked like you have content, you rank a site, and the user has to decide which result he clicks. And now you have the UI, actually the LLM or the chatbot deciding on you for you, what kind of result or what brand gets recommended. And as we see here in the funnel phases, we see, or we have seen in the experiment and for the informational branded terms that owned pages got cited over 70%, and the rest was mixed PR for that brand. When it goes down further the funnel, we even see that owned pages even increased with 74%. But the really interesting part is when we go into the consideration phase, so really thinking about purchasing or close to a conversation, we see that also review, UGC, Reddit, Trustpilot, the reviews gets pulled in. So really the LLM tries to be confident enough to answer, to recommend a brand or not, or which sources it uses to recommend or form the answer in the end.
Yeah, and I think some of this is just, it comes back to sort of the function of the prompt and how the LLM views the prompt and the prompt response. Certain types of sites and certain types of pages tend to be better suited for specific types of queries or inputs from the user. And so we see a lot of what's happening with where brand pages do well is they're slotting their content into a particular intent that maybe doesn't exist as much in these consideration or third-party PR type locations. And that allows them to sort of find quick lift and an opportunity to actually own a part of that prompt response. So kind of an example would be a lot of these press publications are not necessarily really telling a full brand story. They're really providing branded content in snippets or in very sort of short form pieces as part of like an editorial piece. And as a result, the LLM can't really go to them for, good data, good prompt response filler, since they love to chat a lot. And so your own website actually can pull in that content and be pulled into that prompt response pretty quickly, either for an informational query or prompt, or a transactional query or prompt, if you're really structuring your site and providing that content in a meaningful way. And welcome to Jules. We glad to have you join us here. We had a little technical difficulty getting in. All right. So the next myth that we talked about was that you have to lead with your brand story, and AI will do the work of filtering out the brand stuff, the marketing stuff, the fluff, and AI is going to be able to sort of ascertain and pull in the necessary content for a prompt response from your web page into its particular prompt response. Can you cover that one a little bit for us, Patrick?
Yes, of course. Here we also see that this myth was busted. So the rule is bottom line up front. I mean, you probably have seen this in other studies and content online that you should give the answer up front. We have those too long didn't read or summaries on top, because we all know, we see in the AirOps experiment in that case, and Kimi.ai experiment, we see that 44.2% of AI references came from the first 30% of a document. It makes sense. There are other studies that show that they take the beginning, the middle, and the end and synthesize this together. But here we see it, it's from the first 30% of a document. And it also makes sense because when you think about cost of retrieval, LLMs, when they do a web search, they try to get the answer as fast, as cheap, as with less tokens as possible. And therefore, this myth is also busted that if you put in a summary at the beginning or too long didn't read and give the answer up front, you satisfy the user intent. And in that case, it also gets cited more. That's what we see here.
Yeah, I mean, our internal testing, we've seen this really play out. And I think you touched on this in our last call. And it's a big guiding principle for Coalition as we think about our GEO strategies. And that is the economics of search and retrieval for an LLM are very different than they are for Google. Obviously, as advertising becomes more commonplace inside of LLMs, it makes more sense for them to invest more in search and indexing and this content retrieval being more holistic. But right now, it's largely an unpaid add-on to their core product, which means they're offering it for free. And so they don't make money on it, and they're not going to want to run up a large bill attached to all of this search and retrieval by indexing a massive cross-section of the web or by trying to wholly index every URL that they discover, whether that's by crawling Google or by some other means. And so really, I think one of the things for SEOs to kind of grab onto is that as long as search remains an unpaid, not a well financially incentivized model for these LLMs, expect them to take shortcuts and to play cheap. And so text that's high on the page doesn't require them to load fully a page or try to parse fully a page is going to always have a little bit more weighting and be worth paying more attention to. Again, like I can't stress that enough. It's like, I think one of the biggest guiding principles here is just the economics of the LLM itself, since they essentially offer a more meaningful retrieval to paid subscribers, and free subscribers get that plus ads. You sort of have this competing economic model where you make more money on search for the free user than you do for the premium user. And so you actually sort of see these things flip in how they get handled by some of these LLMs. All right, our myth number 3, just update the publish date. That signals freshness to AI engines. LLMs are kind of dumb. They just are going to look at a date you put in there, and that's enough. What was your takeaway on this, Patrick? I know we actually had a little bit of a conversation, maybe a different point of view here, but yeah, jump in with what you were finding.
Yeah, actually, here we see that cosmetic refreshes like updating don't register. In that sense, yeah, you should update more, in my opinion, not only bump the date or bump the year, right? And also again, there should be alignment. And that, I mean, of course, we also saw it in the SERPs at some point that people had like the year as a placeholder indexed because they updated, and that's not working. And Google is, I mean, and if we take Google as an example, which is the index for some of those searches, is that they exactly know when there was like a minimal change or a bigger change to the content, and I've read it that the last 10 snapshots or something they have it, and if something minor changes, they also understand that it's not a major change, so to speak. And yeah, in the general, so only swapping dates doesn't make sense in that direction, I would say.
Yeah, and this is, I think, where we would put a little bit of an asterisk on this, just given our own testing. So I think one of the things that we're finding is that Google does some of these things better and more thoroughly, and maybe is also better at identifying spam or kind of underhanded SEO tactics than some of these new LLMs that are just trying to figure out search themselves and maybe are starting to borrow some of Google's playbook. So what we've seen is that for true LLMs, that these sort of underhanded date updates with minimal, if any, updates actually can work. And they seem to also fall into the trap of even just adding something like a year or a month in a year to a title or to a URL can be enough to actually improve a ranking and positioning in a prompt response. Whereas with Google, again, we see sort of a bit of a different approach for Google search results where, again, they're better at actually identifying what was a meaningful update, what's changed from date to date or from a stamp to stamp. And because of that, it's why Coalition is not recommending sort of these date modifications or date updates or republishing your content without marrying that to an actual change in content. Because ultimately, Google still drives a lot more traffic than most LLMs. It commands a lot more search behavior than most LLMs. And right now, I think just by search utility, the AI overview still is the most popular AI search product out there. And so if you're trying to do something to win with ChatGPT, which has, small market share in search and retrieval, and you ignore Google, which has a lot, you may be gaming to win over here, but maybe losing over here. And so while we see that maybe LMs are a little more vulnerable to this type of tactic, it's probably not the scalable strategy that you think it is. And it may actually work against you inside of Google, which both on the AI search front and on the search front, we see as being more important than some of the other LMs out there today. All right, so myth number 4, standard editorial headers work fine. AI doesn't care how they're phrased. So maybe explain first, because the phrasing standard editorial headers might be a little bit distinct for some, and talk through, again, this strategy change specifically and how what we're seeing working or not working.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, in one sentence, what we see is that when you use H2 or H3 headings raised as a question, this gets pulled in as citations better, essentially, because what you mimic here or try to mimic is when you know what the search query or the query fan out is of a prompt, you see what it runs. And also I also saw it in one experiment of myself where I had like an entity described what's the best so and so on, and I saw the LLM doesn't know what it is, and it always run a query fan out what is it as an example, right? And it always grounded with what is it again. And when you have the content to also answer that, or even have a dedicated H2, H3 on your content piece or target page, then this gets pulled in a lot better. So essentially, question style phrasing of H2s and H3 work pretty good to drive AI citations.
Yeah, and for us, we work with a lot of brands that are very brand focused, fashion, beauty, and traditionally they've liked this sort of branded narrative content on their site, which makes sense if you understand why you're on that page, why you're looking at that product, why you're looking at that particular company, but doesn't really make any sense to an LM because it's mostly just fluff. Nobody really cares what your approach to small kitchen design is unless they're looking specifically for your approach, your brand, your company approach. And if you're really trying to be featured higher in the funnel in that discovery informational type of prompt response, you really start to have to think about shifting your content to be more engaged in this question and answer type format, so that you have a chance to actually participate. Now, again, for brands that are highly brand focused, one of the challenges that you'll face in the future is that organic search as we know it, which is sort of you navigating through search to someone's website, is going to go away. People have talked about sort of the Google zero sort of future. And ultimately, I think for brands, you have to start thinking about how does your brand get represented and discovered fully inside of an LLM instead of having the opportunity to necessarily really tell your story through your website in a way that you maybe traditionally have. And it just pivots your strategy for your website, I think, more and more. You have to start to think again more about this discovery layer and less about that branding layer. When you get somebody into a brand specific evaluation, tell me about Patrick's small kitchen design company in Vienna, then maybe then you get a chance to sort of have your branded story told. But before that, you're going to have to find a way to get your name mentioned and your product mentioned.
Correct. And one addition to that is you can also do that strategy on your product pages. If you create FAQs per product, it also drives a lot of visibility for your products. It's from another study, I can't recall now from whom, but I also read that. And so, but it's the same idea essentially.
Yeah, FAQs are a great piece of content, whether marked up or not marked up. We'll touch on that, I think, in a few minutes. But they are a great piece of content, a great structural addition to a lot of websites. And actually, one thing I would call out is this: when we're doing conversion tests to see if we can improve conversion rates when somebody's on your website, that type of content also tends to work well for your actual users, which is, I think, pretty valuable to know. You're not necessarily just chasing the LM, you're also chasing what your consumers might be looking for. All right, myth number 5, positive language and feature lists are enough for AI to recommend us.
Yes, again, as we said in the beginning, an LLM must be confident enough to answer for certain things. So, I mean, if there is a web grounding involved and you ask for, I don't know, the best small kitchen devices or the best for small kitchens under 10 square meters, it essentially not only looks at feature lists, like one example is it looks at various listicles also and checks, okay, what is mentioned there. So let's say this product is good for this use case, and on another source it finds it's not that good on a use case and some kind syndicates it all together. So we need to have alignment in as much sources as possible. And therefore, then the LLM is confident enough to answer it. And you can also actively shape that with various sources, so to speak, to get the tone for your products right.
Yep. I think for us, like our testing, what we're finding is that, wait a second. Our testing, we're finding that part of this is that actually is one of the areas where some of the LMs differ. Some of the LMs are mainly looking for what is the most prominent piece of content that most directly answers this question. So is there an article perhaps that specifically addresses this type of query or query fan out? And then again, because they're only looking at the top, is this clearly communicated? And can we just relay that? Others are looking at essentially writing their answer and then trying to validate the answer as much as they can. And that goes back to our earlier webinar on training data versus search and retrieval. And so understanding in your particular vertical and product what is happening and how some of these citations are being generated is really critical. And this is, I think, an area where not only using a tool like Rankscale is valuable, but also doing some manual examination yourself and seeing across different devices and IPs and locations, signed in, not signed in, paid user, not paid user. How are LLMs actually responding to these might tell you about how your strategy might change, given the value of some of these prompt responses. Again, if there's what we're seeing for a lot of companies that have traditionally done very well in SEO, they've had one or two key terms or key topical focuses, and they're not doing as well inside of the LLM. And part of that is because they are either missing from the single source that an LLM is retrieving, or inside of the sources that are being cited, they're not being cited frequently or not being cited in key parts of that content, which again kind of goes back to our earlier myth that we touched on.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about myth number 6. Strong, well-written prose is more important than statistics and citations. You want to bust that myth for us, Patrick?
Yes, of course. So essentially, the Princeton study shows clear that data wins. So essentially, factual density is the single strongest lever for a citation. So LLMs, when they make a web search, they need clarity. There should not be any unclear things for them, and because then it goes into a thinking process again and thinks, okay, that's not correct. It has to ground from something else. And essentially, we see when you can back your claims with hard data or your own data, it's best for getting cited and having the LLM aligned on the answer, what you actually want to say. And that's why also we have a facts page on our website, for example, and it exactly tells us what is rank scale and what is rank scale not, so that it doesn't get mixed up with maybe different concepts or close variants to our name. And it actually cites this fact page pretty accurate. And yeah, we see a huge success. Even this core concept of dedicated grounding pages is copied now, or others invented similar things, and it just works to see your brand ideally represented in the answers of LLMs, actually.
Yeah, I grew up with trading cards. I don't know if anybody else used like sports trading cards, or maybe you played a game like Pokemon or something like that. And those cards had, a single sentence bio and then stats, lots of other little things just to indicate about the card or the player or the character that you had. And we're encouraging a lot of our clients to essentially build a page or add this to their About Us page when we're talking about brand citations, because again, it helps to sort of draw a really clean, very linear connection of when the LM starts to talk about you or your product or your service, it has the natural sort of autocomplete already done for it. And again, I think part of like the training that we're seeing, and again, kind of we touched on, you had a great phrase for it, the token budget or token economics, Patrick, I think you used in our last call. Cheapness is the way I refer to it. The cheapness of an LLM in search is one thing to consider. But I think also the other thing that you have to look at is LLMs really want to be providing quotable things. And so most of what an LLM does is just regurgitate what's there elsewhere in a new way. And if you think about how that actually works in real conversation, most of us, we end up requoting statistics, sometimes wrongly, that we saw on social media when we're talking about politicians and we're talking about economics and we're talking about theories. LLMs are doing the same thing. They're sort of trying to look for these quotable elements. And so the more quotable you make your content, which again, usually is these sort of statistics, quotations, external citations, those things are going to be beneficial to you in terms of actually positioning inside of that prompt response.
Yeah.
All right, myth number 7, AI-generated content hurts your AI search visibility and should be avoided entirely. Again, another one we had a little bit of a back and forth on here, Patrick, but maybe you could give us the nuanced answer.
Yeah, at least what we see here from the source we analyzed, we see that LLM-based AI systems, at least in 2024, preferred AI-generated content because it's structurally closer to their prediction patterns, because you have to understand an LLM like creates the next word based on probability, and when it matches this closer to what it assumes it should create, then it prefers it. That's what the study is about. I also have to say that, yeah, in general, you can create AI generated content, in my opinion, if it fulfills the user intent, if it's helpful. Of course, it should be AI assisted, but you should not actually mass generate AI content, because there is even the term Mount AI now, what you can all see in the charts, where people rapidly scaled content fast and, yeah, in the end got demoted by Google and dropped down to an all-time low of their visibility overall. So
Yeah.
don't do it. Create good content.
We've written a ton about this. I get into all sorts of arm wrestling matches across the web and different SEO forums about our coalition's perspective here. But I will sort of jump off of your last comment, Patrick. I think Google is the real key here because, again, today it controls a lot more traffic. And we just have to keep repeating this for our clients. Google still is the largest AI search provider out there simply through AI overviews, and not speaking anything about Gemini or AI mode. Just the number of AI overviews that are showing up easily washes out almost all search and discovery we think ChatGPT handles on a monthly basis. And so because of that, you have to be thinking about what Google is doing and is capable of over maybe what ChatGPT is doing. So again, I think in our testing, we've seen that AI-generated content works plenty fine for pure play LLMs, including Gemini. It does seem like it shows up pretty well, but there's some caveats to that. One of the first caveats is that we know that some LLMs are actually borrowing from Google's index and borrowing from Bing's index, which do have stronger spam filters around, perceived quality or technical scores to measure the quality of content. And in our own testing, we're seeing pretty extensively that just straight line at published AI content or even lightly humanized AI content does seem to follow a bit of a rise and fall pattern pretty consistently within Google search results. So you can produce it. It may go a couple of months where it actually has a chance to rank, garner clicks, get indexed, maybe even generate business for you. But then that value seems to collapse pretty quickly within Google. That's led us to believe that Google is fingerprinting AI content based on particular model releases and is able to do so pretty quickly. And just recently, there was a report that Google published that actually shows some of the technical methodologies they're doing to identify that. And so as an SEO company, we've always sort of been in this funny middle area where technically, the fact that our business is trying to manipulate or control search results puts us at odds with Google Webmaster Guidelines. We also recognize that Google often tries to manipulate the SEO industry by saying things that it finds beneficial or has some sort of economic value to Google specifically. And so you have to kind of be able to navigate that path. And so for Coalition right now, we're really heavily humanizing our content that we want to rank in Google. We're not doing large mass-produced AI campaigns. If we value the domain, I've had a couple of webinars where I've talked to actual business owners who did that, and they've been unable to recover their domain after a penalty with Google. And it's essentially, domain is now worth squat as a result. So I'd put a big caveat on this one on our side.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, breadcrumbs are just nice UX, and AI engines don't use them for visibility. Give me the actual myth busting here.
Yeah, actually, what we see, or at least what in search engine land we saw in the study, is that engines read the underlying HTML structure to understand the hierarchy. It helps to provide topical context, and yeah, and it also maps to the knowledge graph, as we have seen in that source at least. What I can also say, it's not only an UX nice to have, it's also valuable for Google because you reduce the click depth. It also um, that's also why I, for example, recommend an HTML sitemap to just have direct linking to all the pages you have, not only XML, but so a crawler can even follow that. But same thing goes for breadcrumbs. I would highly recommend that you add those breadcrumbs to your content pages, also the schema for it, and yeah, then you're good to go to increase actually your visibility altogether, in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, and again, if here for us, we're 100% on board. Basically, anytime code doesn't really require much processing to execute, and it can be read as a contextual signal, we know that's going to sort of work for LLMs that are operating on a budget when they're doing search and retrieval. So something like a breadcrumb schema, and I think again, we'll have a conversation on FAQs momentarily, but those things we see as having pretty clear value. They work for SEO on some level in your traditional search engines, but they also provide value, we think, to LLMs because again, it's not like it's going to change the economics of a particular crawl analysis of a page and then repurposing that content. And in some ways, it actually helps to reinforce the on-page content in a more linear and direct way than trying to understand the content intent just based on sentence structure or semantics. So yeah, good call out. And one again that I think you can pretty broadly roll out, and just from an SEO benefit, that internal linking and being able to pass a little bit of navigation back and forth between URLs is also pretty helpful. All right, this one, listicles, 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 listicles. Give me the top 10 reasons that you should pay attention to this web. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that, Patrick. But tell me about the listicles and their moment in AI search and discovery.
Yeah, it's there's actually a funny backstory because I also started experimenting with listicles. It was already 2024 and I knew it worked. So I ranked in 5 capitals for fictional best SEO expert. It is still working. It surprises me that it still works and people still jump onto the train or as a strategy. What I see or what we see in general, they work, they get cited. Um, what I heard now from Lily Ray actually that some way Google seems to be able to see it if it's a self-promotional listicle, so it gets cited as source, but it just skips your own brand. So that's it. That's kind of not so good to work on that. But what now the next trend is essentially that you create listicles on third-party domains or other domains or properties you might be able to control, and essentially being factually correct, finding a unique angle, and really getting the arguments down why you should be on position number one in that listicle is the best approach. And it's also safe to say then, because there is actually also law in at least in Germany and Austria. You cannot simply say you are the best.
Yep.
That doesn't work. So you can go around with we think we are the best or something like this. So, but yeah, it's always on the edge, but it still works. I think if you find a unique strategy, you can use them. We also have one. I mean, it's old already, but there are so many AI visibility tools, listicles. It's crazy, and it's a whole industry right now. They sell you placements there for a lot of money, and it's probably not worth it.
Yeah. Yep. No, and I do think this is an interesting one where I think like it's a workable tactic. There, excuse me, if you're a legal brand, if you're a sizable brand, you likely have legal oversight and obligations that someone who's a fly-by-night solo practitioner doesn't have. So someone who's a new startup might be willing to cheat and break the law, assuming that nobody's going to notice or pay attention. But if you're a bigger brand, these listicles can run you afoul of state and federal law inside of the United States and certainly inside of the EU. There's other protections around this. So be careful with them on that front because the issue is much bigger than how well do you rank. Beyond
Yeah.
that, I think there is, again, sort of this, we've been seeing some of this patterning where AIs now are increasingly being trained to call into question merchandising and marketing type language on pages. So ChatGPT, we just recently did a study about how LMs talk about brands or people. And in general, when talking about brands or products, LMs are becoming more negative and more critical. And so when you are self-promoting, what we have seen happen, and we think will continue, is that your content about yourself on your own URL is likely to be called into question by the LLM, but the content you're publishing about third parties is not. And so by publishing a lot of these listicles, potentially you benefit the competitor. And we actually have enjoyed that benefit a lot. I think we've published maybe 1 or 2 listicles ourselves in the last couple of years, but no more than 2. But we've received several hundred free do follow links and lots of free content for LLMs about how good we are in different categories, sometimes in categories we don't even actively target. That's been generated by third parties. And so I would be careful here. And again, Google, I think, is also better at surfacing and identifying this sort of self-promotional effort. We expect to see more crackdowns on this in the future. And again, Google, because of the market share, is one that you probably have to watch a little bit more than others. All right, I think we are at the end of our content pieces. Does anybody have any questions? Make sure you throw them into the Q&A. There's a little button at the bottom there for Q&A. We can answer those as we go. So if you have a particular test or something you've done that you think is working or not working, or you want to know maybe why we think it's not working, feel free to drop those in. Otherwise, we're going to go on to part 2, code and technical myths. We're going to talk about some specific myths that what happens really before I think an AI even reads a single bit of your content. So Patrick, first question, first myth is technical SEO is just a pillar of AI search. Can you bust that myth for us?
Yes, of course. So there are various ways actually how you can lock yourself out of AI answers. And that's essentially first thing, if you block the crawlers, the various crawlers we see here, for example, ChatGPT bot, CC bot for common crawl, it's mostly used for training data. Also, new models will be based on newer common crawl databases. So if you lock them out, and they cannot access you, then your training data about your brand will not improve. Also, same thing, you can block crawlers in various ways. You can block them client side, you can block them server side. So check your robots.txt. This is more, that's not a hard rule, so to speak. There are still crawlers that just ignore the robots.txt, but also a lot of companies and enterprises just really server side block certain IP ranges and stuff. And the marketing department is then thinking, okay, why we are not getting cited. Second thing,
I'll call real quick. I want to call it.
Yes,
I was going to call in the first one. Watch your host provider and watch your CDN provider and watch your firewall provider, because some of these companies are now rolling out their own directives without asking you what's the right response. They're trying to do it because these bots can be quite, load intensive because you're getting millions of extra crawls that, really aren't humans every month. So be careful and kind of keep an eye on your newsletters that you get from Cloudflare or whomever, telling you about how they're changing their strategy, and maybe periodically also investigate some of those things.
Yes, of course. The second thing, if crawlers can actually retrieve your content, next thing, and it's probably if you work in SEO, something you do anyway, is try to get indexed in Google. Google index still 80% of search market share around. Bing also pretty interesting because it also has new insights about AI visibility recently. So I would also log in there again and try to index. And one third thing I saw recently is that Claude is really on the rising right now, and people already found that it highly correlates with the top 10 results in Brave search. So this is something you can look into it as well in the future, because especially in the professional field like coding agencies, Claude has a high adoption rate, and therefore if you want to be visible for certain frameworks or your own framework. Might be worth looking into Brave Search as well.
Yeah, and I would say this is where, like right now, LLMs, you kind of want to play almost like an industry and audience card, depending on how you want to prioritize them. So if you are targeting developers, if you are targeting, technical agencies, where Claude is pretty prolific, probably a good spot to say like, hey, maybe ChatGPT prompt response rankings are not quite as important as this Claude opportunity, and maybe pivot that LLM strategy a little bit more based off of that. And again, like I will say, like just the rule of cheapness, I'm going to bring it back to everybody's mind. LMs are doing search on a budget. And so if you make it difficult to load or expensive to load your content, you're going to find that you end up getting into particular trouble. There's a little
Yeah.
graph we had really quickly that pops up, AI rendered JavaScript. You can see sort of the list of those that are and are not. And a lot of your big ones, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity, Meta AI, Copilot, are not just HTML.
Yes.
All right.
So here we see, for example, it's still the first technical myth, structured data, AI cheat sheet. I mean, this means essentially it's the same thing. You imagine the DOM of an HTML document. Probably the schema is in the beginning, and it also is a nice key value pair, which explains all the facts about the page. And it still gets the answer even earlier. Same thing with how to breadcrumb list. We already covered that. So it helps just the LLM to understand what the page is about,
Yep.
and extracts the content actually.
Yep.
I even tested this a little bit. If you update something on the website and specifically ask it what's new on this page, it also does a live retrieval and gets this key value pair directly out 10 seconds later. So just be clear and factually correct. No, just keep it factual, so to speak.
Yep. Yeah, if markup doesn't require an expensive load, it doesn't look like it's a manipulative, like you're trying to do some sort of prompt injection, and it's essentially readable as plain text, I think it's going to have benefit to you. I know there was another study that came out recently that showed FAQ schema markup and local business markup really didn't move the needle in Google search results, but it did have a bigger influence inside of ChatGPT and others. So again, just I think this type of addition just helps a computer understand your human-focused content in a way that a computer is going to find more readable, and so it makes a lot of sense to continue to do that. We did have a question come in from Natalie. She asked, you mentioned robots.txt. What do you think about llms.txt? Have you guys tested this on your own site?
The
Actually, we haven't.
llms.txt. A quick one is a few slides ahead. Then we dive into it specifically.
Okay, all right.
So maybe it's
We'll
good
save that.
to wait for that one.
Okay, we'll do it. And then we'll also hold on the second one since that's related. So we'll jump down and we'll go to myth number 11, prompt Claude, and you can replace your entire SEO and content team. My feelings are hurt already just listening to. So it's a nuanced answer, Patrick. Let's hear the nuance here.
Yeah, the thing is, LLMs just cite and recommend things. They are also ground from the internet, and if there are things just false, and they probably also really confidentially tell you something that is probably not good to do as a long-term strategy in your SEO strategy. So of course, AI tools drastically accelerate your work, and you can automate a lot of stuff to make your work easier as an agency. We also do that. But I still think it's pretty early in that field. So essentially, human supervision, checking content in the end, like editorial rehearsal of a content piece, checking what the LLM is even outputting makes totally sense. Is it aligned with brand voice? I mean, you can give custom instruction about EM dashes all day, it still will put in EM dashes in the end. So yeah, we are not there yet, but I think we're in a good way to actually accelerate even more with AI workflows.
Our mandate as a company has been to be the best users of AI in the market. That doesn't mean that we abandon ship on our people. I think honestly, just having probably attempted to utilize AI in marketing strategy and execution more than almost most humans on Earth, I still have massive red flags around doing that at
Yeah.
scale and letting it really be a long-term strategy. There's a few reasons for that. One of which is that AI is still, frankly, sort of manipulated by mass market content publication. So when you ask Claude or ChatGPT or something to give you a strategy, often what it's doing is based on what was the most prolific blog post on that particular topic inside of its training data or inside of its retrieval body. And that isn't necessarily a good strategy for you. And frankly, it may be something that's several years old. We dig into that whole conversation last week about training versus retrieval and which data and content matters and where and when. And so there's real risks there if you start to run your strategy. Other piece is that AI will not tell you when it does not know, even if you prompt. I've seen this people suggesting that this prompt will work consistently. Tell me when you don't know something. It's not going to do that. It's trained to provide a response based on what it has. And your counter prompt doesn't necessarily provide some accountability that you don't have already. The consequence of that is that even when it's told not to say something it does not know and not to hallucinate, chances are it's still going to hallucinate and say something confidently that it really does not know. We see a lot of probably one of the greatest irritations that I have when working with especially smaller businesses is the lack of engagement or competency around the brand specific strategy and a tendency to over rely on the AI to sort of generate something. And we'll get
Yeah.
responses that are copy pasted back, and it'll say, this is this, this is this. And like, you didn't connect it to your Google Analytics account. It's not connected to your Google Ads account. So it's just making stuff up wholesale, and you're trying to make business decisions off of that. So I do think there's always going to be a role for humans here, especially if the training for an AI tends to push it towards this, say something confidently, even if it does not know.
True.
All right, next one down, add llms.txt, and AI engines will start citing your content immediately. And I'm going to maybe kick in here. We also now have entity maps. We have people suggesting inside of SEO forums doing markdown versions of pages. We have all sorts of kind of variants on the llms.txt concept. Let's jump in.
Yeah. We have, to answer the question, we have an llms.txt. We also have a -full.txt version of it. We just implemented it at some point because it's really a 10-minute task max and it doesn't hurt you, so why not? Google officially said you could also call it cats.txt, it doesn't matter. Funny enough, in the Lighthouse tests of the new Chrome Canary release, they actually have a test for llms.txt, and a lot of more agentic tests for the agentic web, or for the agentic web. So it contradicts it a little bit on its own in that matter, but my opinion is just use it. Why not? And same thing with entity maps. It's the same concept as grounding pages. It's factual pages about your topic or your entity in the end. And it just gives clarity to the LLM, and therefore it cannot hurt. It probably only will increase your chance being cited or recommended.
Yeah, I think part of we do this a lot for clients. It's an easy, low-hanging filler type task. It started out buzzy and then it fell out of favor. But again, there's just been some little cues here and there that perhaps it could be a workable standard at some point, like the robots.txt file is today, and similar sort of things for entity, maps and for markdown files. Like yep, exactly. Like they tend to be pretty low effort. They tend to be pretty inexpensive to produce and maintain. And they do seem like they fall into sort of this LMs are cheap sort of approach. Again, so balance them. I think I would just use them with some caveat thing. Use them with a caveat, like don't expect this to be a big win for you in terms of your ranking. And kind of, if you have other things that are a priority, deal with those first, and then get to your llms.txt file maybe. So Do it. It's easy. Again, some indications that it could become more relevant to the future. And maybe again, one other principle, AIs are still figuring out how to do search and retrieval. Like, so just they're in a rapidly evolving, the number of changes to their underlying approach to this is pretty significant compared to like Google, which has been relatively standard for a long time. So, all right, myth number 13, and we only have one more after this. AI already knows our brand. We'll find the answers somewhere on the internet. We don't need a dedicated grounding page. We touched on this. We kind of opened this can of worms a little bit. Patrick, your advice?
Yeah, we see it in our own experiments that grounding pages or entity maps or similar concepts just work. It's the least effort for an LLM to get factually correct information. So given the fact that it's accurate and you don't misuse it, totally go with a grounding page. You can so we have, for example, a /facts slug, which explains everything about Rankscale, what it is not, how it's associated with different other properties on the internet, just to have something accurate out there, because we also saw it in the answers that we were recommended or wrong, so to speak. They said something and we always thinking, where does this come from? And it was just solved with having a facts page, because it checks on your facts page or grounding page and sees, okay, that's not correct or outdated, and you are the source of truth, and therefore you have another low effort strategy to help your AI visibility.
Yep. Yeah, we this has been just a really easy win for us in terms of our SEO strategy for ourselves and for clients. We have so one of the key things to think about is that when you're thinking about a top of funnel discovery type prompt and then the query fan out, one of your biggest gaps, if you go all the way back to the top of our call for your branded discovery there, is that you tend to bury the actual data that the LM wants to cite inside of other marketing pages or pages that have multiple purposes. And so we have one very large client who does an online food delivery service. And one of their challenges is that ChatGPT kept skewing food delivery searches to local groceries that did online ordering and local delivery. And they disappeared anytime some of their early and really important Google queries went into a ChatGPT. And the way we solved for that was simply by building out some of these facts sheets that simply said, like, we deliver here, 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 and then provided some extra data around that. And it worked really well in terms of getting them to be pushed back into the conversation, the LLM side of things. So do these fact sheets, these bio sheets, have those things out there for your own brand. Goes a long ways in terms of making sure that you don't get hallucinations that potentially could backfire on you. Our last and final myth, just prompt Claude, and this is kind of our when we've touched on a little bit earlier, prompt Claude, and you can replace your entire SEO and content team. Is that something we're going to stand by, or are we going to abandon here?
It's not, no, it won't replace your SEO team, of course. So here we have the overview again about the myths. It won't replace your SEO team. We even saw it at Claude or other providers that actually is looking for employees in the SEO field or an SEO lead. So I mean, if it would work, they probably have the definite way for it. So it needs just human thinking still, and actually that's pretty good in my opinion, that we are still needed in the future, and therefore definitely it cannot replace your entire SEO team. It is good, for example, in like you have a long form content or content that you say, okay, please describe me this in 1 or 2 sentences. There is the LLM pretty good to give you this too long didn't read paragraph or something like this, right? This can be automated as well if you have like hundreds of pages and you need to put in something on top. That's a good task for me. But I tried it with something rather simple in matching redirects. In the end, you have to go through the list again, and yeah, you have done it yourself.
Yeah, and I would say most of what happens with AI use in marketing is really still about next best word retrieval. And even like the query fan out process is largely next best word based. And so it's like, what are the other words that are related to this word or this core prompt that's going to cause us to go out and do this search and retrieval? And you don't you can't build a business off of that, especially if you're trying to find a way to accelerate growth or gain market share. It's not a scalable long-term strategy because everybody else is accessing that same thing. It's data that's well known. It's the strategies that are commonplace. A lot of the things that we've touched on today as myths, they're myths, and they're prolific myths because someone out there wrote a whole bunch of blogs 2 years about them, and somebody's been repeating those things for a long time. And people continue to build their SEO strategies off of them, and they continue to not rank in prompts or in traditional Google search results as a result. And ultimately, the people where there's some human context, human understanding, and maybe even people who are thinking about the economics of the AI business model, which we've touched on a number of times, and helping make decisions based on that are going to be really valuable. And again, I think can continue to create unique human value here. So we're going to wrap up. We're right at time. We had 1 minute to spare. We will be getting a follow-up out to all of you just to make sure you have the link to this recording when we get that posted. And please do share it around within your teams and your circles. If you have questions and are looking for support either on understanding how and when and why you're being presented inside of certain prompt responses, Rankscale is an amazing resource for that. And we'd love to be the ones to help you actually navigate that customer acquisition journey and business acquisition journey through AI SEO and through traditional SEO, as well as a number of other different channels. So thank you all for your time. We really appreciate the conversation. We'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about off-page myths, what works in the age of LLMs and AIs, and maybe what needs to change from our traditional SEO strategies. Bye, everyone.